The Nintendo Switch 2 reveal aired live on April 2nd, where we got all the information we've been waiting for, including release dates, pricing, accessories, and the new games that we can expect at launch. But if you're here watching this, you probably feel the same way that I do, and that's that this thing is expensive. Today we're going to talk about everything that Nintendo revealed about the Switch 2, including hardware, software, its features, and most of all, how this is going to hit our wallet. After watching this, I want to be sure you have the information you need to either pre-order day one, hold the line, or skip this generation completely. Let's dive in. If we haven't met before, I'm Suk. I'm a designated accountant and finance professional working for a Fortune 500 company. I've taken what I've learned throughout my career when it comes to budgeting and cost management and applied it to all of my favorite hobbies. Here on this channel, I help you play more while paying less. But that's probably not going to happen today since we're talking about Nintendo, so let's buckle in. So right off the bat, I'm going to say I'm excited, but I'm just as surprised. I guess this is what we have to come to expect nowadays with the state of things, but man, is this thing expensive. I'm sure you watched all the gaming YouTubes share their opinions on the different facets of this release on day one, but before adding to the conversation, I wanted to be as clear as I could on what's out there since there was some misinformation flying around. I wanted to address what we heard from the event, but focus on how we manage this news from a personal finance perspective, including Nintendo's pre-order delay statement and what that could mean for us trying to fit this into our gaming budget. When we start getting into these higher price brackets, the decision to buy gets stickier and that much more complicated. And especially now that US pre-orders have been delayed, to me, given Nintendo's statement, there's a strong possibility this thing gets even pricier. So we'll get into some of those details and what that may mean for us. Let's kick things off with the hardware and what we can expect. The Switch 2 is bigger than the original both in physical size and weight. I actually like that and prefer larger handhelds like the PlayStation Portal because I feel like they fit in my hand better. With the larger size, the screen is bigger as well at 7.9 inches versus 6.2 inches on the original Switch. It's also better in terms of resolution, boasting 1080p, HDR support, variable refresh rate up to 120Hz versus only 720p on the original. Another big leap that we're getting with the Switch 2 is with the internal storage. We're now being offered 256 gigabytes versus 32 on the original. But just like the original, it is expandable with a micro SD card up to 2 terabytes. But keep in mind that micro SD cards from the original won't work with the Switch 2. To give you an idea how this works with the games that we're getting at launch, Mario Kart World is about 23.5 gigs, Donkey Kong Bonanza is about 10, GameCube Nintendo Classics Collection, which bundles Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Soul Calibur 2, and F-Zero GX is about 3.5 gigs, the updated version of Mario Party Jamboree is 7.7, Kirby and the Forgotten Land is 5.7, so this amounts to a total of 50 gigs of the total 256, which is about 20% of the internal storage. Now, if you want to go the digital download direction, you need to understand that digital downloads are larger than physical media. So if that's the direction you want to take your console, you need to factor in possibly getting micro SD cards and factoring that into your cost base. This next update in TV mode was a welcome addition for the Switch 2, which is that now you can connect via a LAN port on the dock itself versus having to use a LAN adapter, which you needed to do on the original Switch. We are getting a bigger battery this time around with a 5,220 milliamp hour battery on the Switch 2 versus only 4,310 on the original. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get more playtime though, because Nintendo is posting that this will range anywhere from 2 to 6.5 hours, whereas on the original we used to get 4.5 to 9. This makes sense given that this is a much more powerful handheld. There's a lot more going on and a lot more battery is going to be required to kind of keep it going. But one good thing is that the charge time in sleep mode remains the same at 3 hours. I'm a big fan of the upgrade that the Joy-Cons caught as well, which is upgrading to a magnetic lock system as opposed to the rail system in the original Switch. So in my book, this is a pretty big upgrade. I was always a little bit worried about the possibility that the rails would just break or just wear over the years. I can't say that I've had that issue, but I also can't say that it wasn't a concern in the back of my head. So big fan of the magnets. Also, the mouse functionality that they put out is pretty cool and how that'll translate into gameplay. I gotta give it up to Nintendo. The innovation and the uniqueness of their consoles always impresses. Now this is the biggest upgrade that the Switch 2 brings versus the original. We can now output 4K at 60 frames per second when connected to a TV, whereas before we were stuck at 1080p. It supports 120 frames per second when you select 1440p or 1080p. Now with hardware out of the way, let's talk about what the Switch 2 offers in terms of software and its features. Nintendo finally added in the GameChat feature by using the C button on the Joy-Con for up to 12 people. It uses the console's built-in microphone and can also take advantage of an attached camera, but that's an added accessory. You can make use of Nintendo's proprietary camera or any USB-C camera, which is pretty great in my opinion. They didn't go the route of forcing players to use the proprietary camera only. Big win for gamers here. Another plus is that up to 4 people can share their game screen, which I believe is at a resolution of only 480p, or they can take part in video chat simultaneously. The GameChat feature is open access until March 31st, 2026, and then it will only be available to Switch Online subscribers. So I'm glad Nintendo went the route of allowing Switch 1 games to be backwards compatible on the Switch 2. In terms of what games are compatible versus incompatible is still ongoing, but just know that close to all first-party games are compatible, but games like Nintendo Labo Toy-Con 4 isn't because the console can't be inserted into VR goggles accessory. I don't think that's a big loss, but if that's something that's important to you, I'm putting it out there for you. And apologies to anybody that might be offended by my opinion. But you can check out the link in the description for more information on the backwards compatibility, since Nintendo does get into specifics here, since there are some compatibility issues. And like I said earlier, this is still ongoing. This next announcement surprised me. The tech demo, Welcome Tour, turns out as a paid game, which is absolutely ridiculous. As far as I know, the price hasn't been announced yet, but come on, Nintendo. PlayStation included Astro's Playroom to help show off the DualSense features as a pack-in, so this is beyond me and screams money grab. This one also surprised me, but in a good way. The Switch 2 now supports GameShare between both Switch 2 and the original Switch when one player doesn't own the game. So you can play together, but it'll only work on the Switch 2 to the original and not the other way around. And even locally at that. Sharing through GameChat or online is reserved only for Switch 2 owners, since obviously that's only a Switch 2 feature. One of the final features I wanted to touch on is that Nintendo also introduced a virtual game card feature, which goes live in late April on the current Switch consoles and at launch for the Switch 2. From my understanding is that you'll be able to share games amongst your Nintendo family account, and then it gets kicked back to you after 14 days of it being lent out to your family members. So I'm not too familiar with all the details here. I'm not really a digital game purchaser in any case. I usually do physical games, but if you want to get more information about this, check out the link in the description where I'll leave the info for you so you can have a look at it yourself. So now with the software out of the way, let's get into the financial side of things and let's try to get an understanding of how this is going to hit our wallet if we choose to let it. So just this past Friday on April 4th, Nintendo released a statement reading that pre-orders for Nintendo Switch 2 in the US will not start April 9th, 2025 in order to assess the potential impact of tariffs and evolving market conditions. Nintendo will update timing at a later date. The launch date of June 5th, 2025 remains unchanged. Nintendo's statement doesn't surprise me because hours after the Nintendo Direct took place, President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs on a laundry list of countries which happen to include countries where Nintendo hardware is manufactured. So now here we're talking about 34% on China, which is where Nintendo historically manufactures its consoles, but has spent recent years trying to move away from, into countries like the Vietnam, who got hit with 46% themselves. Of note, Japan is also facing tariffs of 24%. Though this may not affect the Switch manufacturer directly, Japan is one of the US's top electronic trading partners, bringing in TVs, cameras, audio equipment, and the like, and this could directly affect prices for us as the end consumers. A fun fact here is that the console is actually $130 cheaper in Japan than it is in the US. It may be region locked, but I can appreciate the reasoning behind this move to keep the console accessible to those a part of Nintendo's roots. If we look into Nintendo's statement a little bit further, I want to highlight the point they make about the evolving market conditions. This reverses significant drops in both the Dow Jones and Nasdaq indexes in the US, as well as the same fate for the Japanese Nikkei index, which saw almost a 1,000-point drop on Friday. This is pretty much to say that with all the uncertainty right now circling the US, Nintendo is doing whatever it can to mitigate massive losses in one of its largest markets, if not the largest market that it operates in. On a brighter note for my fellow Canadians, as I was preparing this video, Nintendo of Canada confirmed to the CBC that pre-orders here remain unchanged, and Nintendo was also able to confirm that European pre-orders remain unchanged as well, so I'm very happy to hear that. And now to add insult to injury, Nintendo also announced Mario Kart World will be retailing at $80 US. This was something that we thought GTA 6 was going to headline, but I guess Nintendo didn't want anybody else stealing their thunder. Funny thing is, I just spoke about this last week in my game deal tips video. I'll link that in the description for you if you want to check that out. This is obviously something we haven't seen before in the industry, so now Nintendo's opened that door far ahead of schedule, and even then it was only a possibility. Nintendo changed all of that and made it real. Then we have older Switch games that are catching some updates for an additional $20. And I guess you can equate this to new content, so the price can be justified. And I'm not too mad about that, because I guess if you're adding new levels to play, upgraded functionality and frame rates and all of that good stuff, then I guess it makes sense. But again, it's just take, and it just adds up to the total base cost of this console being something that maybe a lot of gamers don't want to pay. And finally, you have re-releases of old Switch games with new Switch 2 packaging being put up for sale again, but that's pretty much on brand for every game maker these days. So what does this all mean? Well, in the US, I foresee a price increase. It won't be directly proportional to the tariffs that were announced, but I can see the price jumping about $50, taking the base console to $500 and the bundle to $550. And that's what I think is most likely. Best case would be no change or a drop, but I can't see a drop happening in any circumstance. I know some, or even most of you out there, are going to be among the pre-order gang, and that's understandable. But I'm really interested to see how my gamers down south are going to be impacted by Nintendo's statement and how that shakes things up. It's crazy to think that Nintendo's scrambling 2 months ahead of such a highly anticipated console launch. But to their credit, it's not their fault. They have to mitigate loss. And I think right now, every economy out there is trying to understand what comes next for them when it comes to what's going on in the US. And then there's a pretty vocal group out there saying they're going to skip out on this release altogether. And to be honest, I don't blame you either. Our hobby, just like everything else out there, is getting harder and harder to keep going. With the state of things right now, politically, economically, and financially, spending your hard-earned money on these luxuries is becoming a bigger and bigger decision. Personally, as much as I love Nintendo, if you couldn't tell based on my Piranha plant light and my Pikachu wearable blanket that I got behind me, this will be the first time in a long time that I don't purchase a console on release. The price point just really took me by surprise, so I'm going to be taking my own advice here and practicing patience, while still keeping my ear to the ground and trying to hunt down a deal. I know deals and Nintendo are rarely mentioned in the same sentence, but regardless, I'll be waiting. Now it's your turn. Tell me down below if you're going in on the Switch 2 on release, if you're holding the line like me, or if you're out completely. Hopefully you got some more insight into the release to make a better buying decision. And like always, play more, pay less. See you on the next one.